It was a quiet evening at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. President Donald Trump, accompanied by two Secret Service agents, made an unannounced visit to check on veterans recovering from recent conflicts. The media wasn't notified. This visit was personal. He wanted to speak to the men and women who had given so much. As he exited a veteran's room, he passed a nurse in blue scrub standing silently by a cart. She was young, maybe late 20s. Her hair in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. Her name badge read Marina Lel, RN. Trump nodded politely as he passed, but she hesitated. Then, almost instinctively, she leaned in and whispered, "Sir, I know I'm just a nurse, but I need to say something for the sake of someone who can't." The guards tensed. Trump stopped, slightly surprised. He turned to her, curious. "Go ahead," he said softly. Marina's voice trembled. "There's a patient in room 114B, no family. He's a veteran, lost both legs in Afghanistan. He doesn't speak anymore. But he smiles when I read him your speeches. Today he cried not because he was sad, but because he felt seen." Trump blinked. A moment of silence passed. She continued, her voice cracking. "He's losing hope. I don't know why I'm telling you. Maybe because nobody else listens. Not really." Trump gave her a long look. "What's his name?" "Specialist Granger." "Sir, Dean Granger." With a solemn nod, Trump walked down the hallway toward room 114B. Marina stood there frozen, heart pounding, unsure if she had just done something incredibly brave or foolish. She never imagined that her whispered plea would be heard and that the next 24 hours would change her life forever. Trump stepped into room 114B. It was dimly lit with the beeping of machines filling the silence. Lying on the bed was Specialist Dean Granger, early 30s, pale with a calm but hollow stare. Both legs were gone. His hands rested on a blanket, fingers twitching slightly. Trump approached quietly. "Dean," he asked. The soldier didn't respond, but when Trump sat down and placed a hand gently on the bed, Dean blinked twice, a flicker of recognition. Marina had followed to the door, watching quietly. She mouthed, "He understands." Trump cleared his throat. "I was told you served in Afghanistan. You gave this country everything, and I want you to know it hasn't gone unnoticed." Dean's eyes welled up. Trump noticed a journal on the table. Inside, pages were filled with words written by someone else. Nurses, maybe. Little notes. "Read Lincoln's Gettysburg Address today. Played Johnny Cash." One entry caught his eye. He smiled when I read Trump's 4th of July speech. He raised a thumb. "Signed, Marina Lel." Trump looked at the soldier. "That nurse of yours, Marina. She told me everything. She says you're a fighter. I believe her." Dean closed his eyes. One tear rolled down. Trump reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pin from his lapel, and gently placed it on the table beside Dean. Marina moved beyond words, wiped her eyes. She had never seen Dean react like that before. As Trump stood up to leave, he turned to Marina and said, "You did the right thing." She didn't know it then, but something far bigger had just been set in motion. That night after his visit, Trump didn't sleep well. He kept thinking about the soldier, how silent he was, how moved. But what lingered most in his mind was the nurse. There was something about the way Marina spoke. Not seeking fame, just trying to make someone else feel heard. The next morning, before he returned to the White House, Trump asked for the full file on Specialist Dean Granger. His chief of staff handed him a folder. Inside was a letter. It had been written by Dean before he lost his speech due to trauma. Complications. It read, "If I go silent, let someone speak for me. If I can't stand, let someone stand beside me. If I lose everything, please remind me I still matter." It was haunting and beautiful. Trump stared at the letter for a long time. Then he asked, "Do we have her name?" The nurse. "Yes, Marina Lel. She's been at Walter Reed for 3 years. lives alone, volunteers at the veterans shelter on weekends. Trump nodded slowly. I want to do something for her. Quietly. He made one call, then another. By lunchtime, 3. People in Washington were tasked with gathering more about Marina's story and preparing to bring it to light in a way that would honor her humility, not exploit it. Meanwhile, Marina was back on the floor, changing sheets, holding hands, and whispering hope. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, at Walter Reed began like any other. Marina grabbed her coffee from the vending machine, clocked in, and made her usual rounds. She paused outside room 114B to check on specialist Granger. He was awake, eyes focused, and more alert than she had ever seen. Good morning, soldier, she said cheerfully. Dean blinked, then slowly lifted his hand and gave her a thumbs up. She gasped. That's the strongest move I've seen from you yet. He held it there a moment longer, then pointed toward the table. There was a note, not his. It read, You matter. Keep fighting, DT. Her hands trembled. That couldn't be, could it? Suddenly, a call came over the hospital intercom. Nurse Marina Lel, please report to administration. She looked around, confused. Did someone report me? As she walked down the corridor, she noticed people staring, staff whispering. One doctor gave her a knowing smile. When she entered admin, a woman in a dark suit greeted her. Miss Lel, I'm with the office of the president. May we talk? Marina's heart skipped. Is this about yesterday? The woman smiled gently. Let's just say your whisper was heard. By 10 a.m., news vans were already parked outside the hospital. But they weren't there for a scandal. They were there for something far more rare. A quiet. Nurse was about to become the face of something truly meaningful. By noon, headlines across social media read, Nurses whisper to President moves a nation. Trump meets silent veteran and the nurse who spoke for him. Marina stared at the screen in disbelief. She hadn't spoken to a single reporter. She turned, off her phone. Her hands shook. She wanted to hide, but patience needed her. Down the hall, Dean Granger had visitors. A team from the Veterans Outreach Department had arrived with gifts, fresh linens, and a promise. The president asked us to make sure this man gets everything he needs. Marina watched from the door, overwhelmed. One of them turned to her. You're Marina? He asked about you too. Back in her break room, she found a letter on the table. It was printed on White House stationery. Marina, sometimes the quietest voices carry the most truth. Thank you for being a soldier for the voiceless. Tomorrow I'm telling America your story with your permission. DJT. Marina sat down. The tears came suddenly. Tears of exhaustion, gratitude, and disbelief. No one had ever thanked her like that. She had become a nurse because her older brother, a Marine, died when she was 16. She couldn't save him, but she could fight for others like him. She never wanted attention. But now the world was watching, and deep down she realized maybe this wasn't about her at all. Marina walked out of the break room, the letter still trembling in her hands. She took a deep breath and glanced at a photo pinned inside her locker. A young Marine in uniform. Her brother Nathan Lel killed in action in Fallujah. He was only 22. She touched the photo softly. I wish you could see this, Nate. That night, she returned home to find reporters waiting outside her apartment. Flashes, questions, microphones. Nurse Lel, how did you meet the president? Why did you whisper to him? Is it true you read his speeches to a veteran? She froze. Her neighbor, Mrs. Nari, an elderly woman from upstairs, stepped between her and the cameras. This girl helped my husband walk again after a stroke. Let her rest. Marina managed to make it inside. She sat in silence for an hour. Then a message arrived on her phone from the White House. You don't have to speak to the press. We'll respect your wishes, but the story is already spreading for all the right reasons. Attached was a video. Trump addressing a small crowd of veterans that afternoon. This nurse, Marina Lel, spoke not for herself, but for a man who could no longer speak. Her whisper carried a wounded soldier's truth. She reminded me that service doesn't end on the battlefield. Sometimes it wears scrubs. Marina covered her mouth with her hand. Tears streamed down. She hadn't just been heard. She had become a voice for others like her. The next morning, Marina's hospital was flooded with calls from families, foundations, and media outlets wanting to know more about the whisper that shook the room. Walter Reed's director called her in. "Marina, the president personally asked if you'd be comfortable doing a brief interview with a journalist who's a veteran herself. No pressure." She sat nervous. She'd never been on TV. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't want fame. But something tugged at her. Dean's thumb rising, the letter from Trump, her brother's photo. She nodded. "If it helps other nurses or veterans like Dean, I'll do it." That afternoon, she met with the journalist, retired Army captain and CBS correspondent Naomi Brooks. Naomi was warm, grounded, and gentle. She said, "We'll talk like friends. No makeup. Crew, just you and me." The camera rolled. "I became a nurse," Marina began, "because I wanted to help the ones who come back broken. Not all wounds bleed." She told Dean's story, how he hadn't spoken in months, how reading speeches gave him peace, how one whisper wasn't about politics, but about pain, about someone being forgotten. "I didn't think the president would stop. I just had to try," Naomi asked. "And what did he say?" Marina smiled faintly. "He asked for Dean's name. That's all. That's when I knew he really heard me." The interview lasted 12 minutes. By nightfall, it had reached over 4 million views. At Walter Reed, Dean Granger's room looked different. Posters were up, cards were taped to the wall, messages from strangers. "Keep fighting, Dean. You are not forgotten. We heard your nurse. Now we hear you." Dean couldn't speak, but something inside him was shifting. He became more engaged, more expressive. On a quiet Wednesday morning, Marina entered his room to find a small crowd, 2 therapists, and 1 senior nurse. "Watch this," the therapist said. Dean was sitting up. With effort, he reached for a parallel bar fixed near his bed and slowly pulled himself to a standing position with a harness supporting him. His arms shook. He gritted his teeth, but he stood. Marina gasped. He gave her a look, one of pure determination, then slowly lifted his hand and saluted. The therapists cheered. Marina covered her mouth, eyes flooded. Someone captured the moment on video. Within hours, it was everywhere. Veteran stands for the first time in 2 years after nurses whisper to Trump. Even the president reposted it, writing, "This is what hope looks like. Proud of you, Dean. Proud of you, Nurse Marina." For the first time in a long time, America wasn't arguing. They were watching something real. Marina returned home that night to find a letter in her mailbox. No address, just her name. The envelope was covered in crayon hearts. Inside was a handwritten note from a little girl named Ellie. "Dear Nurse Marina, my daddy can't talk because of war. I read your story to him, and he smiled. Thank you for being brave. I want to be a nurse, too." Attached was a drawing, a nurse holding hands with a soldier, and a tiny girl watching with a heart above her head. Marina sat on her couch and cried. That night, she posted the letter on social media with the caption, "This is why we whisper, for the ones who can't speak, for the ones who need to see hope." The post went viral overnight. Teachers began sharing it in classrooms. Nursing students quoted it in essays. Even late-night hosts mentioned her not as a celebrity, but as a reminder of quiet courage. For Marina, the fame wasn't comfortable, but Ellie's letter reminded her that stories, even whispered ones, can plant seeds, and sometimes they grow in the hearts of children. The next day, Marina was called to the hospital auditorium. She thought it was a staff meeting until she saw the flags and the cameras. President Trump walked in flanked by Secret Service. He waved and stepped to the podium. We often honor those in uniform, but today I want to honor someone who wore different colors, blue scrubs, and carried out a different kind of mission. He turned to Marina. "Nurse Lel, would you join me?" She froze, slowly walked up. Trump reached into a small velvet box and held up a gold pin. "This is the Presidential Volunteer Service Award with distinction. You didn't ask for recognition. You didn't need a stage, but you gave someone their voice back." As he pinned it to her uniform, she whispered, "Thank you for listening." He whispered back, "Thank you for speaking." The room applauded. Dean Granger, watching from a wheelchair nearby, lifted a hand and gave her the same salute he'd given before. That moment would be replayed on television for days. But for Marina, it felt like everything came full circle. Even after receiving the award, Marina returned to her regular shifts. She still cleaned wounds, still listened to grieving families, still worked weekends at the veterans' shelter. "Why don't you take a few days off?" her supervisor suggested. "You've earned it." But Marina shook her head. "They still need me." That night, a new patient arrived, a young woman, Specialist Tara King, fresh out of a combat zone, suffering from severe PTSD. She didn't speak, refused food, barely moved. No one could reach her except Marina. She sat at her bedside night after night, reading quietly. Not politics, just poetry, letters from soldiers, and even Ellie's crayon note. On the third night, Tara whispered, "You're her, the whisper nurse." Marina smiled. "I'm just someone who stayed." Tara reached out and held Marina's hand. Sometimes the most powerful thing isn't a title or a speech. It's showing up again and again. That week, the hospital saw a 15% spike in volunteer applications. Because when the world sees courage in scrubs, they want to follow. A week later, Marina received a package at the hospital. Inside were 237 letters from veterans, active duty soldiers, and military families. Some typed, most handwritten. One said, "I haven't been hugged since my last deployment. After watching what you did, my daughter came home from school and hugged me for the first time in years. Retired Sergeant Paul Ramirez. Another, I wanted to end my life last month. But I watched your story and suddenly I wanted to try again." Anonymous. The letters poured in. Marina spent every lunch break reading them, crying, replying. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't rich. She was just someone who gave people space to be seen again. She created a bulletin board in the hospital's veterans wing titled Whispers That Echo. Every day she pinned a new letter. Soon, families began reading them out loud in waiting rooms. Visitors brought their own stories. Veterans who hadn't spoken in months opened up. Marina hadn't just whispered, she'd started a movement. Late one evening, Marina's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, picked up. "Hi, is this Marina Lel?" "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Peter Granger, Dean's father." She stood up. "Oh, I no need to say anything," he interrupted, his voice trembling. "I haven't heard from my son in 2 years. Doctor said I shouldn't expect much." He paused. "But yesterday he called me. He didn't talk, but he made sounds, tried, and then he held the phone like he didn't want to let go." Marina wiped a tear. "He's getting stronger." "Because of you," Peter said. "You didn't just care for him, you believed in him, and that changed everything." She sat down. The weight of those words hit deep. No award, no camera, no speech could touch her heart like that one phone call. Dean was finding his way back, not alone, but with someone beside him. Inspired by the letters, the salute, and Ellie's crayon note, Marina created something new. She called it the Whisper Project. A simple idea. Volunteers record short voice messages reading poems, letters, and hopeful words, then send them to veterans in recovery nationwide. She partnered with hospital IT staff to create a small portal. Anyone could upload an audio file. Nurses could play them for patients. The first day, they got 89 recordings. Within a week, there were over 2,000 voices from school kids, teachers, veterans, and even celebrities. One patient whispered, "I haven't heard kindness like that since Iraq." Marina didn't do press. She didn't monetize it. She just kept building it in the background, quietly, steadily. A whisper had turned into a chorus. And yet the most beautiful part was this. Most people who sent messages never even knew if theirs was heard. They sent them anyway. During a quiet shift, Marina helped clean out an old storage room at the hospital. Behind dusty files and equipment, she found a box labeled Unclaimed 2011. Inside was a Purple Heart still in its case. She brought it to the admin desk. They traced it back to a veteran who had died alone with no listed next of kin. His name was Charles McHenry. Marina couldn't let it stay forgotten. That weekend, she visited the local cemetery. She found his grave. No flowers, just a simple stone. She laid the metal gently on top and whispered, "You are remembered, Charles. You earned this." A passerby took a photo. By Monday, it had spread across the internet. Nurse who whispered to President Honor's forgotten hero. And suddenly, the VA began a national initiative. Project Honor returned to locate and deliver every unclaimed medal to families or cemeteries, all because one nurse refused to let silence be the final word. Marina never liked speaking in public, but when she was invited to testify at a congressional hearing on veteran care, she said yes, not for herself, but for Dean, Tara, Charles, and Ellie's dad. She walked into the chamber with a folded note in her pocket. Her brother's. She didn't read stats. She didn't scold anyone. She told stories. Stories of men who returned broken and women who fought to piece them back together. Stories of silence, of whispered hope. She finished with a quiet sentence. Not every hero holds a gun. Some hold a hand. And sometimes that saves more lives than will ever count. When she sat down, the room was silent. Then applause. Not performative, but genuine. That day, 3 new initiatives for veteran recovery passed unanimously, because sometimes change doesn't shout, it whispers. One morning, months after it all began, Marina walked into room 114B like always. Dean was sitting up. He smiled and then he whispered, "Hi." She froze. Her heart stopped. "Hi," he said again. Weak, raspy, but clear. Her eyes filled with tears. "Dean," he reached for her hand and squeezed. "I heard every word," he said slowly. "Thank you for being my voice." She sat beside him, holding his hand for a long time. Outside the window, the flag flew at half-mast for another soldier who had passed that week. But inside that room, life was being reclaimed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a headline. It was just one man and one nurse. And the moment when silence finally broke. A year after the original whisper, Marina received a letter handwritten. "Dear Marina, some stories fade. Yours never will. The whisper you gave me that day still echoes in my mind. It changed how I listen. It changed how I lead. You didn't seek glory, but you gave others a reason to keep going. You showed America what strength really looks like. With gratitude, Donald J. Trump." Inside the envelope was a second pin, smaller, simpler. It read, "For service beyond the call." She placed it next to the one he'd given her months earlier. 2 pins, 1 whisper, a lifetime of meaning. One morning, a new nursing student joined the staff at Walter Reed. She was quiet, shy, and clumsy on her first day. Marina welcomed her gently. "Why you choose this path?" she asked. The girl smiled nervously. because of a story I saw about a nurse who whispered to a president. That whisper made my dad smile again. He was broken. Now he's here with me." She pointed to a man in a wheelchair outside. Marina walked over. It was Ellie's dad. He saluted. She nodded, moved beyond words. The girl's name tag read E. Miller, nursing intern. Ellie had grown up, and now she was ready to carry the whisper forward. Years passed. The world changed. But one story remained, shared in classrooms, in clinics, and among families. A story of a nurse who didn't want attention, of a whisper that didn't ask for power, just presence, of a president who paused and truly listened, of a veteran who stood again, and a child who became a nurse. One whisper, one life at a time. And on a quiet evening long after retirement, Marina Lel stood before a class of young nurses. She didn't give a speech. She simply said, "Speak when others can't. Stay when others leave. And always, always whisper with purpose." The room was silent.